Okay, now we're going to move on to the next big topic of theology. So after the doctrine of the divine decree, which again is the internal essential work of God in oneness. So now God has a divine plan. It's a comprehensive plan. It'll certainly come to pass. We talked about the will of God. Well, now we talk about the general works of God that are unique to God. The next step is actually to talk about creation, which is the first of the external works of God. So now God is simply, he has a plan, and now we see the beginning of the execution of that divine plan. So that's why we'll see in this study of the doctrine of creation, you'll be reading a book on this, various aspects in the theology textbooks, a separate textbook, and we'll discuss aspects of this on the written discussions. There'll be a couple other videos assigned for this as well by another professor. But at this point, again, remember that creation is creation out of nothing, or ex nihilo, which starts with God doesn't use the existing stuff, which is the only thing that exists prior to the creation is divine substance, which is infinite, it's eternal, it's this. So if something is going to begin to exist, God can't use existing stuff, all right? Now, why? Because the stuff is eternal. It can't begin to exist and have the property of eternality, that it never began to exist. Now, I covered this in our defective views of God when we talked about creation ex deo. And pantheism, the idea that everything is God or everything is divine and all is one. See, creation technically is not out of nothing, it's out of God. God uses pre-existing materials because everything is divine. So you end up with God in an ongoing dynamic dream because you really don't have any new substance. You have existing divine substance that is simply changing. Okay? So very important. The biblical doctrine of creation is God as again, we talked about divine attributes, as the self-existing, infinite, immense, and so forth, immutable being, now through an act of power brings substance into existence, which doesn't have to exist. It's contingent, okay? It's not necessary. It's created, but most importantly, if it begins to exist, you can make a really good case it's limited and it's mutable. So everything that exists, from human souls to angels to protons, neutrons, and electrons, are limited, mutable, and the thing is the essences and the stuff is going to be limited and changing, which is going to be important when we start looking at things like the doctrine of human beings, because if God's going to bring us into existence, we're going to be limited and changeable. And that means our knowledge ultimately is limited and changeable, which is why you can start out believing the truth like Adam and Eve and change to believe lies and have an appetite for them and fall into sin. Same way we can change our minds and reject the lies and start believing the truth. That's going to be arguably one of the inherent attributes of creation is limitation and mutability. So, and all that's figured into the divine plan. Now, some pretty important aspects of the biblical doctrine of creation, questions that are going to arise when we talk about this. For example, I already mentioned ex nihilo creation compared to pantheism, but how does creation relate to the decree and divine providence? Quick answer to that is, well, creation is the beginning of the work of God externally to God in the execution of the divine decree or plan, where providence is sometimes called continuing creation, where the fact is God is just continuing to, again, exercise the divine plan and its operation in continuous work. Now, another aspect or a big question about creation ex nihilo is that can this ability be given to a creature? So we start thinking about our apologetics and the problem of false prophets, false miracles, and all this. Can an angel or something actually make something out of nothing? We start thinking about the magical worldview and a non-Christian worldview. Are these kinds of claims even possible for those of you who do counseling and research in this area? So again, is is ex nihilo creation a communicable attribute or property or power that can be given to a creature? And again, is it even possible for the creation to have existed for eternity past? Now, again, we answer that. We start thinking about, did the universe have a beginning? Okay, and this is where we get into, basically cosmological arguments for the existence of God, particularly the Kalam argument, which premise number one talks about, did the universe have a beginning? And we start looking at all the problems and dilemmas of actual infinites in this limited world, and we say they can't exist. Hence, we end up with the concept the universe had a beginning. Well, then, if it had a beginning, it had to have a cause, and then the cause we see has to be personal. So we end up with a personal, powerful being who caused the universe to come into existence a limited amount of time ago, hence God, okay? But we first have to ask the question, is it even possible for the universe to have always existed? That's one of the elements in our apologetics and our theology that's going to be included in the doctrine of creation. And then one of the biggest ones here, again, these are all the interesting apologetics questions, but here's the big one. What does it mean to be a creature in relationship to the Creator? Okay? And this is important because I think we can make a really good case that both human beings and angels were made in the image of God and made to mirror the divine intertrinitarian, blessed, loving relationship that they had in a limited way. And because I talk about this mutability and limitation, again, a certain number of angels changed their mind in sin. The human race fell into sin. But the whole point is that there's a proper relationship to God in whom there is all power, all authority, all majesty, and that a right relationship of human beings and angels in the image of God is to willingly and happily bow the knee to this great, magnificent, loving, righteous Creator and learn from Him and enjoy Him. See, when the whole problem that we see from Genesis 3 to Revelation 20, which is very important because the entire message of the Bible, with the exception of 4 chapters, the first 2 and the last 2, is fixing the sin problem with the human race. Okay? Literally, everything from Genesis 3 to Revelation 20 is all about fixing the sin problem with the human race, because the creatures are no longer properly bowing the knee and in submission to their Creator, who is supposed to be their Abba and Father as well. Okay? So understanding creature-creator relationship is huge. So this is why Darwin, eternal creations, and things like that, these false theologies throw the entire balance and order of the universe out of whack. Hence, we call that sin. Things are not the way they're supposed to be. So we're in conflict. And then finally, we do get apologetics and philosophy questions like, could God have created a second infinite being? Okay, and there we get into these omnipotence dilemmas and other types of questions like unstoppable force versus a movable object. Can there be two omnipotence? And questions like that. Again, we'll explore this later in some of the written discussions. And again, this is an introductory video, so I'm just raising a lot of issues here that we're going to follow up with later. But some of the bigger theological issues are, did God change when He created the world? Now, I talked about this when we talked about the attributes of God, where we distinguish, for example, absolute and relative attributes, innate attributes from, eminent, again, I forgot. I'll have to go back and look it up too. But the point is, there's the ones that are internal to God, and they're the ones that have to do with God relating to the external world. And I gave the example, for example, that God is always infinite and an immense being, but God is not really omnipresent or relatively present until creation. Why? Because there's no relation to the creation prior to the creation. So we wouldn't say in the sense that God gains an innate attribute when He creates the world, but He gains a relative attribute where now this immense being has accrued a relation to this created, finite, contingent, mutable world. okay? That's one of the answers to that. Big question, God and time. What is time? We think about dynamic and static time. Did God create time in the sense of duration and change and succession, in the sense of dynamic time? So we talk about that. We'll talk about that in some of the discussions. But again, the concept of time is important because it includes the idea, does God have a real relationship to this changing, durative, temporal world? And again, I think we're going to end up in some sense with he has to, because if he's actualizing his divine decree and it says at 9 o'clock tonight X is going to happen, God would have to have a real relationship to the temporal world to know that it's now 9 o'clock at night for him to actualize that part of the decree. So knowledge of tense facts, past, present, future, and so forth, are going to be important. Other questions. Big one here I've already mentioned, proofs for deity. The fact is that creation ex nihilo is unique to Yahweh, the God of the Bible. And that's why it's significant when we look at unique divine works, is that when it says, for example, that Christ is the creator, where it says that in John 1 and Colossians 1 and Hebrews 1, that is a great argument that he is in fact the Yahweh of the Bible, because it says that he created the heavens and the earth, which only Yahweh does. So that's going to be, again, important to our study of the doctrine of creation. So from that, many of these other aspects we're going to cover in the sense that how did God do it? What's the age of the creation? Is it old earth? Is it young earth? How do we look at the 6 days or 6 periods of creation? We'll cover all of that, again, in the writings and the books and other videos. But take this as your sort of introductory theme to the doctrine of creation. So I'll see you next in Divine Providence. Thanks.